Uh, I'd like to welcome you all who have joined us online this afternoon. We are sorry for a bit of delay. My name is Subrata and I work with the climate program at WRI India. WRI India is a research to action organization working in the nexus of environment, economic opportunity, and human well-being. On behalf of WRI India, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the third and the final session of this series of stakeholder consultation, wherein this time we'll be focusing on decarbonization of the freight transport in India. Just a few instructions before we begin. All attendees will remain in listen-only mode, but please use the question box on the panel to your right to post questions during the webinar. We will try to take up the questions during the discussion session. While typing in the questions, it will be helpful if you could identify the speakers as well. We request you to kindly ask crisp and clear questions without a long background. Please note that the webinar is being recorded and will be made available to all the registered participants. Today we have a distinguished panel of speakers. We will start with Dr. O.P. Agarwal. He is CEO WRI. Will be setting the context for the webinar. There are some that is being faced. I'm not sure if he's online. We will move to Mr. Chirag Gajjar, who heads the Subnational Climate Action for the Climate Program at WRI India, and he will be presenting on the current state of the freight transport in India and model ships. We will also hear from Mr. K. Sanjay Murthy, IAS CEO and Managing Director, National Industrial Corridor Development Corporation, on challenges and opportunities for the logistic ecosystem. We will also hear from Mr. K.R. Jyotilal, IAS Principal Secretary, Transport Department, Government of Kerala, on subnational experience on the decarbonization of inland water transport and some of the other initiatives that the state has taken. We will also listen from Ms. Sharmila Chavli, IRAS, Principal Finance Advisor, Ministry of Railways, Government of India. She will be speaking on challenges and opportunities for decarbonizing freight transport shift from road to rail. Mr. Pierpaolo Cazzola is Advisor, Energy, Technology and Environmental Sustainability at International Transport Forum, will take us through regulations and standards for clean freight and provide perspective on hydrogen refueling, EV charging and vehicle safety. All these initial remarks will be followed by a virtual panel discussion that will be moderated by Ms. Director, Climate Program, WRI India. With this, let me start the webinar. Dr. O.P. Agarwal. Yeah.
Sorry to interject. Sorry, everyone. Dr. O.P. Agarwal is on the line, but he's facing some issues with the mic. So I apologize on behalf of, and I'll do the opening remark and straight away jump into my presentation. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I think we have a very stellar panel in front of us who are going to provide us various perspective and sectoral inputs from the different fields. We've got Mr. Murthy, who is from NICDC, will provide overview on the logistics. Then we have Mr. Jyotilal, who will provide inputs from the state's point of view on how the freight is going to play a critical role in the days that are coming ahead. And then we have Ms. Sharmila, who's going to speak from railways perspective, who we all know that he is going to play an important role as far as the freight transport is concerned. And then we have international expert Mr. Pierre, who's going to provide some of the insights into the work that they've been doing and also some of the learnings that we can adapt in case of India. So with this background, I'd like to thank each and every one of you to accepting our invite and coming here to speak at our webinar. Can I request Reza to start the presentation? Can we move to the next slide? So we started our stakeholder consultations on 31st of August, where we had the first consultation on broader transport sector opportunities for climate actions. Then we had a second webinar consultation on 10th of September, where we looked at decarbonization of urban transport in India. And today we are going to talk about the decarbonization of freight transport in India. Next slide, please. So as we know that in India, the road transport, so India's modal mix is heavily skewed towards the road transport when it comes to freight, with 60 to 65% of transport happening via road. And in comparison, developed countries have this modal share of 25 to 30%. Next slide, please. What is more worrisome is that, at the time of independence or immediately after the independence, the Indian Railways was carrying 90% of the freight transport, which has gradually decreased, and the road transport share has also gradually increased, which has resulted in significant emissions coming out of the transport sector as well. There are several initiatives that have been undertaken by various institutes supported by international as well as domestic institute as well. One such is a climate responsibility pledge supported by 60 UIC members that calls on to reduce specific energy consumption and CO2 emissions through UIC Low Carbon Rail Transport Challenge, which was presented in 2014's UN Climate Summit, and to the Rail Climate Responsibility Pledge, which was signed in 2014. It also looks at calling on its member countries to achieve the carbon neutrality by 2050 and contribute to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal. Some of the specific modal shift activity target also looked at achieving same flight activity by 2030 in ton kilometer, same as the road transport, and 50% higher freight activity by 2050 in ton kilometer in comparison to the road transport. India basically introduced the draft National Logistics Policy in February 2019, under which the objective was to optimize the current modal mix, which is roughly 60-31-9% in favor of road and water respectively, and align it with international benchmark of 25 to 30 for road, 50 to 55 for railway, and 20 to 25 share of waterways. Now, of course, waterways are a bit difficult, and they are also constrained by the geography that you are operating in. But what it means is that, if we are able to achieve an optimal modal mix that seamlessly integrates the current supply chain that we have, it could thus cut the logistic cost by around 1.2% of GDP. The idea for us is that, how do we move forward from the current mix that we have and achieve the optimal modal mix that is presented in the draft logistics. Next slide, please. Now, with this background in mind, in 2016 and 2017, we undertook a study to understand what factors dictate the modal choice in India, to look at the impact of choices such as cost, time, distance, and additionally GHG emissions in a more holistic way for freight transportation. The study provided us some information not just on the travel distance, time cost between districts and state by road and rail, but also the greenhouse gas emissions for each mode. As part of this study, we collected some data. The map shows the 7 most busy freight corridors in India, who sort of have captured the 50% of the freight transport in India. Next slide, please. Now, the Planning Commission study titled Total Transport System Study in 2009 has the most comprehensive information on freight movement in the country. There have been several other studies conducted by such as Transport Corporation of India and IIM Kolkata. Subsequently, that also provides on the transport system in India. We have also looked at the growth rates from the RITES report to calculate the 2016 tonnage. Now, coal, iron ore, limestone, and dolomite and fertilizer are mostly carried by rail. Road transport dominates in the rest of the commodity. This table that you see in front of you shows the top 7 commodities that make up for over 50% of total goods. Coal, which is mostly moved by railway, makes up for 17% of total tonnage, while the petroleum products and cement structures make up for 8% and 7% share respectively. 80% of coal is transported by rail, whereas 8% of petroleum products is transported by road. Cement structure travel by road and rail in a 50-50 ratio. Coal, cement, and cement structures, chemical manures and fertilizer, iron ore coal products make up for the 86% of the total goods that are carried by the railways. Parcels, petroleum products, and building materials, iron and steel, household goods, etc. They make up for nearly 50% of the total goods that are moved by the road. Very little goods moved by the ship or the waterways. It includes goods such as petroleum products, iron ore, coal, cement, etc. Next slide. So this is again the data that we collected as part of the study. You can see that Maharashtra, Gujarat, and Andhra Pradesh are the top 3 states because of the important ports located in these states. These are followed by Orissa, which is big in mining in Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh. Top commodities in Maharashtra, Gujarat, Andhra Pradesh are containers, parcels, production, coal, and so the ore or mining or next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. In this slide, you can see that 15% of the total commodities in Gujarat are transported by rail, remaining are transported by road. Similarly, if you look at Orissa, the split is even between rail and road. So we were also able to get some insights on how origin states also transport commodities by water as well. Next, please. In terms of the rail, previous total traffic tonnage by origin. So as you can see, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Orissa, these are the states that have the highest tonnage origin. For rail tonnage, Orissa tops the country, and for road tonnage, Gujarat and Maharashtra tops the country. Next slide, please. Based on this information that we had collected, we were able to develop a tool to do a scenario analysis in addition to understand the GHG emissions impact of these modal choices. District level data and maps were used by us to identify the distance between interregional and intra-regional distances and the travel time that needs to be adopted. We also relied on the RITES report to verify some of this information. So the tool looks at request inputs from the user in form of the origin state and the destination state and the commodity. It also requests users to identify the rail share, that desired rail share, if we want to increase that. The data that we have, if you see the bottom table, it provides, for example, in this case, we have selected building materials. In this case, between this route, Maharashtra and Delhi NCR, the 100% of the building materials are transported by road, and hence we entered the desired percentage increase in the rail mode as 20%. So these are the input parameters that are available with us. Next. In this slide, you see once we've entered the desired mode share of 20%, you can see that it helps us estimate what will be the potential change in the emissions if you are able to move from road to rail by 20% of commodity tonnage. So roughly it reduces 15% of the emissions if you are able to move. We've also looked at what kind of vehicles or trucks that can be utilized, or we are able to is certain how it will reduce the emissions as well. Next slide. So based on the study, we were able to understand that there are the modal choices in freight transportation is mainly dictated by travel time and the travel cost for most commodities. In certain cases, such as perishable items and so on and so forth, that the high value goods, they always pick the mode which is fastest. We also often have a perception that one mode is faster over the other. We'll also talk about it in the coming slides. And then industry goods, travel time and distance data to decide the mode of travel. Next slide, please. So um, this table basically provides a comparison of rail versus road on average speed, cost, and the emissions associated with each mode. As you can see on the slide, uh, average speed for railway is 23.7 kilometers per hour. For road transport, it is anywhere between 20 to 45 kilometers per hour, depending upon the type of road that you're of course, this speed does not account for any delays. If you account for delays, the rail should further reduce. Uh, and it also has stoppage impact. Now, the cost per ton, this is based on the NITI Aayog's report that we looked at. It basically says that the railways on an average is cheaper than the road. The additional parameter that we look at is the emissions associated with each of this mode. And if, as you can see, that road transport is at least 7 to 10 times much more emission intensive than the railway mode. Next slide, please. Now, we also looked at the transport demand of the future and what kind of impact it will have on India's emissions. So this chart is created using the India Energy Policy Simulator at WRI India tool. We've looked at some of the scenarios such as conventional pollution standards for LDVs and HDVs with a 60% reduction in emissions by 2030, electric vehicle sales mandate of 30% for freight LDVs and HDVs by 2030, low carbon fuel standard of 20% blending of ethanol in petrol by 2030 under national policy on biofuels of 2018, and then we've also applied the COVID-19 lever of 20% GDP contractions. Uh, what it says is that, under the business as usual scenario, the emissions are going, the travel demand is going to increase, and so are the emissions are going to increase. That's provided by the red line that you can see on the chart. The green line is some of these levers that I just spoke about are applied in terms of the scenario, and you can see the resultant emissions are not that significant. What it means is that we need additional policies or measures in addition to the ones that we have already put in to make a significant dent into the emissions from coming out of this transport sector. Would putting more renewable in the grid can help to an extent? Certainly, it can help, but we will also need to see that. Uh, we're able to achieve the optimal modal mix as we spoke about earlier in the presentation. We've also heard about the dedicated freight corridors that are proposed that have the potential to lower India's cumulative emissions from rail transport from 1.26 billion tons between 2016 and 2046 to 0.29 billion tons. And if we consider a low carbon scenario, it will further go down to 0.09 billion tons. Indian Railways recently also sort of was in the news for their plans to achieve net zero carbon emissions target by 2030, and train journeys could leave zero carbon footprint by 2030 as well, which is a positive news. So would these actions be sufficient to put India's transport sector on a low carbon pathway? I think there are some of the questions that we are trying to ask some of our experts as well, and we hope to look forward to some of the insights as well. Next slide. Uh, I'll just leave with some of these questions. I'm not going to read out all of these questions, but in addition to what you've already seen, we need policies that promote the rapid modal shift to accelerate progress towards low carbon freight transport. Could setting up of upper limit for tonnage for moving cargo through road transport be feasible? How do we incentivize freight transport through low carbon mode? And what are the policy intervention to factor the mitigation costs associated with emission intensive mode of transport? And some of these questions are very important for us to answer how freight transport is able to move to a low carbon transport in the future. With this, I end my presentation and I hand it over to Shubhrata.
Thanks, Chirag, for that insightful presentation. What was very interesting, apart from the questions that you have laid out, is the fall of freight modal share for rail and increase in the road freight transport till now. I guess some of the questions that you have asked will be taken up and form a very good background for the discussion session. I am getting some information that there is some sort of issue with Mr. K. Sanjay Murthy's office. So they are trying to fix it. So meanwhile, may I request Mr. K. R. Jyotilal, uh, to come on board. He is serving as a member of Indian Administrative Service and is currently the Principal Secretary for the Transport, Metro, Aviation, GAD, and Devastam departments in the state of Kerala. During his tenure, he introduced the first solar boat project called Aditya in India. He has also initiated the water metro project with electric boats in Kochi, and he has also commissioned the Kannur International Airport. He played an instrumental role in drafting the EV policy in Kerala and initiating semi-high-speed Silver Line projects connecting 11 districts, whereby inter-district movement by RORO services is possible. Uh, Mr. Jyotilal, you have the floor. Thank you so much. Mr. Jyotilal, maybe you can unmute yourself.
Yeah. Good afternoon. I'm audible now. Yeah.
Loud and clear. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chirag. In fact, OP Agrawal sir, I'm not able to meet him. Maybe see him. So first, let me thank you for giving an opportunity to share some of the thoughts. As you rightly point out, we brought the first solar boat in the country called Aditya, and now I think the cost economics very well work in favor of the electric solar boats. Maybe 30,000 rupees you have to spend for the diesel, whereas now we spend monthly for 250 rupees, and probably the cost of the boat compared to a diesel boat is maybe 50 lakhs more, but the payback period is only 2 years. I think now we have gone ahead with 3 more such solar boats. I think that was the beginning, and we reduced the carbon footprint by 96 tons per year with that. Now we are going ahead with another RORO service which will connect the DP World facility with the island. This will carry for 80 tons. That means a 20-foot container itself can go inside such a RORO facility. And for transporting furnace oil, maybe 150 metric ton from Kochi to KMML, Chavara, we have done the feasibility study. That is as far as the inland water transport is concerned. I think both the goods movement, as generally you say, the economic growth happens when goods move. When people move, mobility happens. Movement of goods as well as the movement of people. If you see in the COVID time, see when everyone is asked to stay back in the place where they stay, across the country the goods movement was allowed, because once you stop the goods movement, that's it, the economy comes to a standstill. So we have got something around 2,500 trucks which carry the essential goods from the neighboring states. So out of which what we are planning was that we are going to slowly ban the inter-district movement of trucks, unless if it is connected by a rail. Now the rail capacity utilization almost 120%. That's why we had a discussion with the Indian Railway Board chairman and other officials. It is found that we'll go for 2 more lines, 3rd and 4th line, so that we will have maybe 2. We can run as can be used for passenger traffic in the daytime, and the off-peak time, night time, it can be used for inter-district movement of trucks, so that the inter-district movement of trucks can go in a RORO service throughout the state. 11 districts it will cover. Maybe another 3 more districts are there which are maybe slightly away, but we will inter-district movement, we can use that. This is a 100% green project. This is a $10 billion investment. Now the project has been prepared by SISTRA, and the DPR is under examination by Railway Board. Hopefully it should come soon, and we are going ahead with the land acquisition of the project. Now that is a lifeline. So we will use the Silver Line for connecting all the inter-district movement, then integrate various other modes of transport. That is where I think the crucial role we have to play. The facilitation, what is required for a intermodal integration is required in all these stations. What we are planning is a logistics ports, where the trucks can come, and trucks can be, maybe we'll provide the warehouse facilities adjoining the station. Each of the station we have identified 200 to 300 acres of land adjoining, so that we can have enough space for warehouse, logistics hub, as well as what is a facilities for all the maybe truck or allowing the intermodal integration. So then containerization. In fact, one of the things which happened is you don't have a standardization, or containerization has to be popularized so that it's easy to move from one mode to the other, from road to rail, or what is vice versa. So this is a main project which we are looking. We are planning something around 275 lakh ton carbon dioxide reduction by the moment the first year of implementation. We expect to complete it in 5 years. So this will remove around 18,000 passenger cars per day from the roads. It will reduce the accident, it will reduce the carbon emission. Simultaneously within the district, we to integrate the within the district movement. We are planning the logistics parks in all these districts. This will take away almost minimum 500 trucks per day from the districts. So this is another main initiative which we are now taking up. Then coming to the some of the issues, I think before I conclude. See, rail, maybe you know that it's all fragmented. See, the goods operators are basically fragmented, in the sense there are lot of small people. So you need to aggregate. You need an aggregation. Last time, I think if you see when we did the container station at Vallarpadam in Kochi, we have invested heavily. We put a railway line. Unfortunately, there is only one train going. Why is it that after investing so much of money, we are not able to get a new track has been built? So that means there are a lot of agencies involved. Railway is there, probably a port is there. Then so there is an urgent need for bringing all the multimodal Transportation Goods Act in 1993, which is not applicable for domestic freight movement. I think we should make it applicable so that there is various agencies which are working. There's a coordination, or you can say ideally it is what is required is integration, because coordination means sometimes things may not happen the way we envisage. There has to be apex regulatory authority, just like a TRI is there, or NHA is there. It should, because civil aviation is there. When you call port, it can start with the logistics port, the rail ports, or the ships, or the airports. So we need to integrate that. There has to be apex regulatory authority which will do the coordination at the national level. Then another important factor is just like mobility. We are planning open source platform for the mobility of maybe passenger movement, so that there is intermodal integration and you use IT, so that it's much easier and the cost of logistics should come down. So a similar thing has to be done for the goods also. In fact, Kerala is the first state to bring in a legislation, and in fact, yesterday we published the rules also for a MTA, Kerala Metropolitan Transport Authority, which will integrate various modes of transport. One of the components is the freight movement, so that in fact, apart from the reduction of the emission, it's the reduction of the number of accidents. We have got something around 4,500 people dying every year in the road accident. We could reduce it substantially due to our intervention, but I think ideally we should look at zero accident. I think this is very much important, because the freights lead to maybe the truck movements is one of the reasons why the maximum accidents are also happening. So I think this is another point which I would like to highlight. Then there is a need for aggregators. In fact, so in the Vallarpadam container terminal, one of the key things was unless we have got aggregator who can give the entire the rake, you have to book the entire train. So that means unless there is aggregator who will be able to give the volume, then it may not be viable. So I think that's one need. Apart from the warehouse, if you look at the warehouse space, I don't think any data is available. Information asymmetry is very much there. I think it is in fact, we are also trying to maybe compile the entire data, but I think it's all information asymmetry and the collection of information, and whereas to single agency which will be able to give that, so that we can plan well for these logistics ports as well as further investment. Another one is this infrastructure investment. This may not give the returns immediately, though it's a remunerative. So I think there is a need for a PPP financing as well as private investment has to come in this sector. Government can do a facilitation role in this regard. Logistics parks I have already covered, multimodal integration, and then see the why people go for the truck. In fact, when the COVID initially started, we had to get everything. Being a consumer state, we need to get everything from outside, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, then even up to Rajasthan, Assam, etc. So the trucks movement was the first priority. But when you need to transport by bulk, especially Rajasthan or from commodities from faraway places in north, then we need to look for alternative. But when you see, it's very easy to arrange a truck because it's a point to point, or it can go to any destination. Whereas when we have to load some pulses from Telangana, so we need to tell at least 1 week in advance, then book the rake, then the loading, everything has to be tied up. So there are umpteen things which need to be facilitated. I think that is it's a very much advantageous if we go by rail. But the rail freight charges, if I say, there's a cross subsidization. Probably the passenger movement, train movement, I think it's not that remunerative. That's why we are also going for what is a non-fare, means what is a other than passenger goods movement for our silver line semi-high speed, because that's more remunerative. So I think there is a need for a passenger, maybe railway also to facilitate in in increasing the freight movement. Apart from the coal and maybe other commodities which they transport, I think there is a need for helping integrating the road transport with the rail, so that more people will switch over to the rail. If you have to have a 31% to increase to 55%, 50 to 55, I think there is a need for that. And second is water transport is an unexplored area. Now we just started that, and we found that probably initially the issue was how do you give the push or the engine capacity what is required. We started with 100 passenger boat. Now we are going for RoRo facility. We found that the battery size, LTO battery, lithium titanium oxide battery, which we found that is more viable for such passenger freight movement. Now we are trying next step, as LTO is only one option. In fact, the Cochin shipyard is building the boat for the water metro. Some 75 100 passenger boats is being built with the KfW assistance for Kochi water metro. Next stage, what we are looking at, try fuel cell, because Cochin has got the LNG, which can be the Air Products USA is already producing almost 3 lakh cubic meters per hour is the production capacity in BPCL Cochin refineries in Kochi. So then green hydrogen. In fact, Kochi is the first place in the entire world where the airport is run 100% on solar energy. They got 40 megawatt. In fact, they have got excess capacity. So green hydrogen can be generated using water. Fortunately, we have got enough water resources. We can convert using the solar and use that for the mobility sector or transport sector. I think we can easily, Kochi can be the India's first hydrogen economy, where the water can be used as maybe using solar. We can use green hydrogen. LNG can be for a bulk use. I think probably LNG conversion into hydrogen is another option which is available. I think the fuel cell is the future, and apart from battery, there are LTO battery is good, but maybe for up to some limit. I think ships and boats and train. In fact, we are exploring the possibility whether we can run the semi-high speed and high speed trains using this fuel cell. And running in the national highway network itself, we are planning either in the national highway as well as in the by side of the silver line. If we can put the hydrogen pipeline, we have got almost 3 ports, which are major ports. One, the India's transshipment hub is coming in Trivandrum, and Kochi has got a port, and the northern side also we are building the port. So the port can be used to store the hydrogen, and it can be supplied on either side of the port, maybe 100 kilometers. They lay pipeline. All the towns can be connected, so that means the entire coastal area can be covered with the hydrogen supply lines, which will help in cleaner transition for the freight movement as well as for the passenger movement. Then there are certain issues regarding last mile connectivity. I think that that also need to be addressed, because unless the last mile and first mile is covered, I think it won't be. I generally say it's a to Z of the entire supply chain or the value chain, right from the field, whether you talk about agriculture or MSME, right from the product up to the maybe sale point or the farm to the plate. I think those issues need to be addressed. I think then only the freight movement, what is it, decarbonization, as well as what is it, reduction of the emission, reduction of the cost of logistics will come down. I think that can lead India into a very maybe next higher level of economic growth. I think that has to happen. It has already started happening. Government of India also brought in, I think, logistics, separate ministry is there, separate secretary has been posted. I think we need to go immediately for a multimodal. One is Transportation of Goods Act. Same thing may be applied for domestic sector, freight, as well as apex regulatory body, plus maybe open source platform using maybe IT. This in nutshell are some of my suggestions. I think probably we'll take up other issues in the question and answer session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jyotilal. It was very interesting to note that there is already experiments happening with the clean hydrogen and fuel cell experiments in Cochin, and you very rightly pointed out the issues related to the integration of rail with road. But what was fascinating to hear is the coming down of the operational cost when you switch to solar boats from diesel. I mean, like 30,000 rupees to 250 rupees is a stark difference. And obviously, the initiatives related to logistic port and how this logistics park that can take out 500 trucks out of the road, not only contributing to the reduction of GHG emission in the transport sector, but also from the road safety point of view as well. Very interesting initiative, I guess. But since you are talking about railways, may I now invite Ms. Sharmila Chavli to come on board. She is 1986 batch of Indian Railways Account Service Officer, currently serving as Principal Financial Advisor for Northern Railway, Government of India. Prior to this, she was a Joint Secretary, Infrastructure Division at the Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance, Government of India, where she oversaw the structuring and launch of innovative infrastructure funding vehicles, revised municipal bond guidelines, and the Credit Enhancement Fund. She was also a member of G20 Infrastructure Working Group and has been a director on the Board of Directors of the India Infrastructure Finance Company Limited, the Indian Railway Finance Corporation, and ONGC Videsh Limited. Additionally, she has also worked as Executive Director at the Railway Board and Director at the Department of Economic Affairs. Ms. Chavli, you have the floor now.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me here. Following on the excellent background given, including on the railways by the previous speaker, I'd like to talk about 3-4 things. One is my pitch for the railways, what we have done so far. That will set the background for that will set the background for the 2 issues that I want to raise here. One is the set of challenges that we face, and 3, the opportunities we have, including in PPP, because that's my subject. 1, what have we done so far? I think the first, Chirag, when he made his presentation, was showing that the freight, average freight speed in the railways was about 23 kilometers per hour in his slide. Currently, we are at 50 plus, and we aim to go at 60 plus. In terms of the green targets that we have, the corporate objective is to become a net zero carbon emitter by 2030. All BG routes are going to be electrified by 2023. Currently, we've done about 60% electrification. We do on an average about 1,000 kilometers per year, but we've picked this up in the last 2 years. We did about 5,000 route kilometers last year, and currently we have 40,000 route kilometers which have been electrified. In terms of the possibility of doing more. We are also looking at setting up solar and wind power plants along the railway track. We've already set up some pilots, and we have done about 100 megawatt solar plants which we have commissioned, and on the rooftops of various buildings. In terms of the share that we have just now, our loco holding is about 6,000 locos diesel and 6,000 locos electric. We plan on becoming entirely electric, but then those of you who have been following this in the papers also know that we've set up recently a joint venture where we produce diesel locos also. The attempt is to source our electricity from green sources. But the flip side of all this is, I think, again, in Chirag's presentation, he showed you the maximum commodities that are carried by freight. Coal happens to be one of the biggest money earners in freight transport. We are aware that with thermal becoming the persona non grata over here, we have to switch to other commodities also, as that is what earns us our money. During the pandemic, we have been able to capitalize on the limited passenger services being run by introducing new forms of capturing business, because we are now, I think the previous speaker had mentioned that we could have intermodal connectivity. We are trying to do this with container aggregators also, so that we can provide a door-to-door service. The biggest problems that we faced on the freight side, all of you are aware, one is of course the cross-subsidization, which meant that some of our commodities were priced very high. The Rail Tariff Authority, who will eventually look at this, is expected to rationalize the rates that we offer for freight. The second thing is that road has actually multiplied the kind of ease of services that it provides to consumers, which we weren't able to do earlier. We weren't nimble-footed enough to do it earlier. We have been trying this, and we've set up business development units during the pandemic. These have been extremely successful. My railway, that is Northern Railway, which I work in, is primarily a passenger railway. But in the pandemic, we've become the second or the third highest freight transporter in the country. We moved the food grains from the northwestern basket, the food grain growing area, to the rest of the country. That's the background. Technologically, what we've done is we are trying to convert locos to head-on generation. This, in the last set of figures that we have, where we have done this, the 500 pairs of trains have been converted to HOG, and we have reduced, I think, carbon dioxide emissions by about 350 tons per rake per year. We plan on increasing this. I want to come to the issues that we have. I mean, what we have done so far is extremely impressive, but the problems that the railways faces, one is financing. Electrification is expensive. The overall cost for electrification includes the traction cost, that is the buying of the locos, the maintenance of the locos, and the conversion of the track. Each of these requires money. Unfortunately, since we are a government entity, we have to also fulfill the social obligation of carrying passengers. In the railways, we have this rule of thumb that any transport of people less than, or even for freight, for less than about 300 to 500 kilometers is best served by road. It's only in the longer distances that we become more cost effective. Now, on the electrification routes, that's the approach that was taken. We tried to take the longer routes first. The reason is that the cost per track kilometer, and I'm talking in rupees now, the conversion rate is about 72 rupees to the dollar, but the cost per track kilometer of conversion is 80 lakhs. So a longer route gives us the economies of scale. We can do it better. The cost per loco ranges between 12 to 15 crores each, and the maintenance costs are reasonable. So if you were to do the entire electrification of all track, we would be talking about of 1 lakh crores. That is the requirement, where we are challenged in terms of the support we get from the central government and the money that we're generating ourselves. This means that we have to make more money in terms of revenues. We are trying various things, including privatization of certain passenger services. We hope that will make us money, but these have a long lead. Eventually, when this happens, we will be able to also price passenger tickets the way they should be. The dedicated freight corridor, which is coming up, will be a great boon, because we are also doing the feeder routes so that there's seamless integration of the logistics for freight transport in the country. The simultaneous problem that we also face is that diesel locos that we have, about 4,000 to 6,000 that we have, will also eventually need phasing out. The old form of locos that we use, the Alco locos, they have a life of about 35 to 40 years. We're phasing out the older ones just now. Their disposal is an issue. When we sell it as scrap, we get very little. We get about 0.5 crore per loco. We do cannibalize a lot of the parts. When we export them, we get about 2 to 3 crores per loco, but the market is very limited for this. Mostly the countries in Africa and in East Asia and South Asia. We haven't been able to do that. We have a very limited number of exports on this. The other problem is that the diesel locos which we're trying to phase out, we have been trying to see whether we could have dual use. You retrofit them so that they can run as electric. This is becoming very expensive and it hasn't succeeded so far. What do we do with all those locos? That's something that we are looking at. The other issue that we are also facing is that the diesel utilization reduction hasn't been commensurate with our increase in tapping of electricity for running our traction. This is primarily because we still have islands of diesel on an electrified route. For instance, most of the sidings, which are private sidings, are not electrified, which means that you continue to use diesel traction to move the freight to come to the feeder point for the main line. The current mission is on all the longer routes. We ensure that the sidings are also electrified, including by sharing costs where necessary. This brings us to the issue of how do we finance this? This has become a challenge for us. The PPPs that someone was mentioning, PPPs are viable only in certain sectors. What we should be trying is PPPs in terms of the generation of power, because this is something that will be remunerative. We could have microgrids. This has been attempted in some areas, especially in the industrial hubs. If you have microgrids, which are solar or wind, which are feeding into the main electricity grid, that's something that we are looking at. We are trying to rope in local industrial hubs for this. We are also trying to see whether the thermal that we're using, we have open access now, so we get good rates from the state electricity boards, whether we can have some kind of a feed-in tariff system where you have small InvITs being set up, which is sister organizations are looking at this in states where you have a lot of residential solar also. These are things of the future. One of the issues that you have raised in your, I think in your suggestions is, what kind of coordinated policy planning would end this kind of fragmented approach we have? The railways have been working with other forms of modal transport, that is rail and water authorities, both in the central government and in the states. We are trying to make this seamless as far as possible, and during the pandemic we found that it's actually succeeded. Now, how the logistics authority in the central government is going to look at this is something we have to wait and see. We are very hopeful because for us, one of the issues that we face is everyone is very quick to criticize the railways, saying that they're not doing enough. But you have to understand that the railways run on permanent way. For us to change our approach to how the traffic can be loaded becomes very difficult, which is why we are looking at the aggregators, including containers. The container train operators have been working with us. We are trying to see how best we can set up optimal warehousing and logistics centers. This new the opportunity that people seem to sense and the popularity of setting up small little warehouses everywhere is going to add to logistics costs. We should have multimodal logistics parks that are cost effective, which means that they are large. The areas that they're located in should be maximum of 1 kilometer away from, say, a railhead, and they should be large enough not to permit container movements in that, and also not congest urban areas which are close by. So we are trying to work with state governments to see that these multimodal logistics parks aren't set up within city areas. They should be slightly outside. We would encourage the private sector coming in, maybe with state authorities, where we facilitate this, because then we would be providing the service for something that is being carried by rail, rather than propagating the setting up of multimodal logistics parks with our money. I'll end over here because the issues that have been flagged by Chirag will come out in the panel discussions, and I think the previous speaker has spoken about how states also are approaching this. Our problem continues to remain finances. Electrification is priority number 1 for us, so we're trying to find the money for that to meet the 21-22 target. And once we do that, the source of the electricity would be the next thing that we'll be looking at. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chowli. That was very interesting. I totally agree with you. Finance is one of the critical parameters when we talk about, decarbonization of the freight transport. And, electrification is expensive. That is something which cannot be ignored. What was also interesting to learn from the railways perspective is, railways is already planning on phasing out some of the diesel locos. However, disposal is an issue, and multimodal logistic park, that the idea of having these parks within 1 kilometer from the railway yards, I think that will solve a lot of congestion problem that the cities are facing. But despite these issues, what is commendable is your plan to go net zero carbon by 2030, and still pursuing the electrification. With this, maybe I can now invite Mr. Pier Paolo Cazzola. He is advisor on energy technology and environmental sustainability with International Transport Forum at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. His work has focused on strengthening the ITF's capacity to analyze energy-related aspects and projects pertaining to ITF's decarbonizing transport initiative. Prior to joining ITF, he coordinated the work of the transport team at Energy Technology Policy Division of International Energy Agency, including the development of IEA energy model. He has also worked with UN Economic Commission for Europe as the secretary of the working group on pollution and energy of the World Forum for the harmonization of the vehicular regulations, during which he also developed a forfeits model for analyzing the impacts of GHG emission mitigation policies for the transport sector. Mr. Cazzola, you have the floor now. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'll depart from the rail sector to look more into road sector. So we recently released a publication on regulations and standards for clean trucks and buses, which focuses on electric and hydrogen trucks and buses, and so in this case, most relevant for trucks. So that's what the presentation is going to be about. Can you move to the next slide? Very quickly, I worked for the International Transport Forum. For those of you that do not know it, the ITF is an intergovernmental organization. Actually, I should have updated the slide. We have now 62 member countries. The map is up to date. India is one of them. We're basically a think tank for transport policy. We look at data, statistics, analytical aspects. We are most known probably for, well, besides the publications, an annual summit, which is the largest gathering of transport ministers, taking place every year when there's no COVID constraints, especially in Leipzig, in Germany. The ITF also has a way to communicate with private sector, which is called Corporate Partnership Board. and has a number of areas of focus, including digitalization, connectivity, safety, access, and decarbonization. So next slide, please. What I'm going to talk about now is framed in the context of the Decarbonizing Transport Initiative, which is something that was launched in 2016 after the signature of the Paris Agreement, and that aims to support governments in defining policies that help decarbonizing transportation. It's enabled by partners, funded, and the modeling capacity of ITF. Can you move to the next slide, please? And has a number of activities which include tracking progress of different countries, for example, analyzing what is in their NDCs and nationally determined contributions and how this meets or not the Paris ambition. Looking after in-depth sectoral reports, focal studies, national pathways, and then policy dialogue. When it comes to India, we have two important projects in India, so that is under the national pathways. They're both funded by the German Climate Fund. They're called Decarbonizing Transport in Emerging Economies, NDC Transport Initiative for Asia. One of them is an activity we're developing together with WRI and other partners. And when it comes to what I'm presenting today, this is under the focal studies. So this is a report on regulation and standards for low and zero emission vehicles. Yeah, next slide, please. So getting into, I mentioned these two projects, one more. Next slide. So I'll skip this one in the interest of time. Well, when it comes to the report, I mentioned this is about regulations and standards for electric and hydrogen trucks. Why this? Because regulations and standards are a major prerequisite for the large-scale deployment of these technologies. So the report looks at them, focuses on electric and hydrogen because they are enabler of low and near zero emissions. And it covers different aspects of these, looking at safety from the vehicle perspective, but also from the charging and refueling infrastructure perspective, as well as environmental performance. And that is looking at the vehicles, but also the manufacturing process and the fuel production. Next slide again. So on safety, so first I'll give you an overview of what we have understood, and then I'll give you an overview on the recommendations, and the last couple of slides are going to be specific to India. So what we have understood is that when it comes to safety, trucks are not at the center of what has been developed so far, which has been focused more on cars. It will be important to ensure that trucks are properly covered, and that will require probably provisions that have specific, that need to fill specific gaps that currently exist for heavy-duty vehicles. That is also based on the idea that the technical requirements are not the same, and so it is going to be important to develop specific items, so specific parts of the regulations will look after vehicles that have heavy weight and high power requirements, such as trucks. Next, please. When it comes to charging, hydrogen refueling, sorry. So key references here are the International Standardization Organization and the Society of Automotive Engineers, which is basically the places where the standards are developed. What is important to know on hydrogen is that when it comes to heavy-duty vehicles, most of them now use 35 megapascal tanks rather than 70 megapascal tanks. If you want to use hydrogen on trucks, you most likely need to switch to 70 megapascal tanks, if not liquid, cryogenic storage. For these, the regulatory framework is not yet ready. So there's no refueling protocol for 70 megapascal. There's no nodal agreed internationally on that would allow to fuel trucks. And when it comes to liquid hydrogen or chemical bonding or other solutions, there's currently these are not seen as something that could be commercially viable within the next decade in the regulatory community. There's an additional requirement. If you want to do hydrogen in trucks, you need very pure hydrogen, and it's not easy to get that. So there are a number of developments that need to happen on the policy side to ensure that that's going to be the case. The alternative will be to use hydrogen in internal combustion engines first. Next, please. So on electric charging, the reference organizations are the International Electrotechnical Commission and ISO and SAE. There are also two associations called CHAdeMO and CHARIN, which have high relevance. CHAdeMO is more rooted into the power industry, CHARIN more in the European automotive industry. They have been very active in trying to develop standards which are suitable for heavy-duty transportation. We're talking about standards that require high power, 1 megawatt. So they also require DC, direct current. So the progress exists, has been primarily developed in these international groups, but there are lots of challenges that come with this, in particular due to the fact that this is really high power charging and the need to properly talk among stakeholders and bring in as many as possible. When it comes to standards, there's also one additional item that I think is worth talking about, is the case of electric road systems. So I understand there's some degree of interest in India in that, and in this case, what has been most developed relates with the systems with overhead contact lines. I'll get to more details about what is still needed later. Next, please. On the environmental side, so if there are two slides on this. One is focused on the vehicles themselves, and one is focused on their manufacturing and fuel production. So for the vehicle side, the reference organization is probably the United Nations, World Forum for Harmonization of Vehicle Regulations. The regulations are focused primarily today on tailpipe emissions, either of pollutants or greenhouse gases when it comes to vehicles. They, in case of trucks, typically apply to engines, and they are complementing with portable emission measurement systems for on-road tests. When it comes to greenhouse gas emissions and final energy use, they require software which has been developed for dedicated purposes. In Europe, this software is called Vector. In US, it's called GEM. In Japan, it's called HILS, Harvard in the Loop. And voila, this software is something that is heterogeneously developed in different regions of the world. And requires and may benefit actually from greater harmonization, and also currently doesn't integrate low or zero emission vehicles, so neither battery electric nor hydrogen powered vehicles. So that's going to be a requirement for future development. Next, when it comes to the part related not with the tailpipe, so can you move to the next slide, please? The current situation is that you need to go to slide 11, please. Okay. So one important aspect that is emerging is the relevance of batteries as a contributor into the life cycle emissions of vehicles because of embedded carbon. So there are developments which are important and are being kicked off, especially in the European framework, about ensuring that there's a greater transparency about embedded carbon on batteries. So this is important to be flagged, and it's very politically relevant, also in the space of ensuring that the battery manufacturing industry emerges in regions of the world which are different from China, Korea, and Asia, which is the current focus of where battery production is located right now. There are also aspects that relate with the regulations that apply to the fuels, so the emissions of fuel productions, which are not only related with tank to wheel, so the part of the vehicle, but also to well to tank, so the way the fuel is manufactured. This is especially important for low and zero emission vehicles, since neither electricity nor hydrogen are subject to tank to wheel emissions, but they are subject to well to tank emissions. Next, please. So on the way forward, what we understood is when it comes to safety, there's a need to ensure that all classes of vehicles are covered. This is not yet the case. There's a lot of room to leverage the experience of international fora, such as the WP29, and there's a need to ensure that all aspects that are not currently adequately considered are actually covered. So these some key examples are the need to deal with thermal propagation in case of, for electric vehicle batteries, especially once they are very large, and aspects that relate, for example, with periodic inspections of high pressure vessels used for storing hydrogen. These don't exist today, or crash test safety provisions, for example, in the case of rollover, and this is more relevant for buses when you have the vessels located on the top of the vehicle. Next. On EV charging, so I mentioned before the fact that we're talking about very high power, and so this requires a very thorough stakeholder consultation and engagement to ensure that there are contributions from both the power sector and the automotive sector to develop standards. The key reason for this is that when we talk about trucks, we talk about mission critical type, missions that are basically that have a critical nature that require charging at a given point, at a given location, and at a high power rate, and that location has to be compatible with what the grid can support. And then there are missing elements still in the deployment of standards and regulations related with electric roads. Aspects related with interoperability, metering the electricity consumption, and more general safety specification, for example. But in the case of catenary overheads, this is less of an issue in the sense that there is already a body of standards available from the rail and trolleybus sectors, and that could be more easily converted into standards for trucks, but we're not yet there. Next. So on hydrogen refueling, I mentioned before the need to ensure that there is a possibility to store hydrogen at 70 megapascal on trucks. This means that there is a need for the development of standards on high flow nozzles, and there is a need to develop this refueling protocol. So these are not yet in place, even though work is ongoing in parts of the world to ensure that that's going to be the case. The nozzle is being dealt with in SAE and the protocol in Europe with a number of pre-normative projects. Also, there is a need to ensure compliance with quality requirements for hydrogen. I mentioned this before. This can be a barrier for fuel cell. You need very high quality hydrogen, very high purity hydrogen to work on fuel cells without compromising their durability. And then there's a need for ensure, this is something that has been probably overlooked. There's a need to ensure that there's a better understanding about how especially hydrogen vehicles can operate in existing vehicle infrastructure, especially tunnels, underground tunnels or underwater tunnels. This was something that we had a workshop on this and was clearly flagged by Dutch colleagues that were concerned about the use of these vehicles in constrained spaces and mentioned specifically the case of tunnels. So there are also issues like this for electric vehicles, trucks and buses, and that's the case, for example, related with safety requirements for bus depots, which would also apply to logistic companies having several trucks. So there is a need to develop fire codes and codes that help vehicle owners understand how they need to park them and how far and why and what kind of protections they need to use. Next, please. On environmental performance, I mentioned before the fact that greenhouse gas emissions regulations are not harmonized internationally, and this is an issue. So I also mentioned that there is a need to integrate electricity and hydrogen vehicles into the regulatory policies that exist for greenhouse gas emissions, but also on the fuel side, to ensure that there is a proper accounting of well to tank emissions and not just tank to wheel emissions, which in this case would be zero. There is a need to address non-regulated pollutants in case of hydrogen combustion in particular. There is a need to look at the environmental performance of batteries, in particular embedded carbon, and this requires a lot of innovation in regulatory developments. The center of this is probably Europe at the moment, where this is actually happening. And then there is a need to harmonize the regulatory framework for differentiated road charges and access restrictions. This is a point related with the fact that currently there is no clear understanding internationally of what is a clean truck or a clean bus, and whether anything can be and whether, for example, there are parts of the world where access to cities is regulated for certain types of vehicles and not others, and this is very heterogeneously developed in different cities. There would be a lot of benefits for scale and market development for these clean vehicles if there was a more harmonized definition of what would actually be allowed or not to enter into these regulated parts of urban environments. Next, please. So the next two slides are focused really on the case of India. So what I want to say on India is that I believe that both regulations and standards being prerequisites or enabler for technology development and deployment also matter a lot for India. India is a major OEM, so it's a major global producer of vehicles, and so it's affected by this. I understand that India has a strong ambition on e-mobility, including electric roads. So what I'm talking about now is something that falls definitely within the scope of what India should look into. I think the case of India, especially in the case of once one looks at the mix of the power generation, well, it's characterized by high reliance on coal, and so a very high relevance of well-to-tank emissions. So when talking about electrification and climate, it's important to look into these aspects. So luckily, I'm well aware that India is very active in the WP29, so this is good news for the vehicle-related policy developments, and I think that should continue. It's an important engagement. When it comes to energy efficiency and air pollutants, my understanding is that since India has been in the WP29, closely working with governments that apply EU regulations, it's likely or more logical that this alignment with the EU approach continues. This is true for both greenhouse gas and local pollutants. So next, please. When it comes to charging, I also understand that the current approach in India is to align to the CCS with the European style CCS, or CCS is the main standard for light vehicles when it comes to DC charging, and so it will be important to continue to take that approach once the truck the charging standards for capable for trucks will be developed. It's also important to ensure that what is being done in the UN framework on the integration of hydrogen and heavy and electric vehicles in other regulatory frameworks will be brought forward in India, so that presence in WP29 ensures that. Probably there's more to do on electric road system. This is something that, as I said earlier, I understand is within the scope of what is being looked into for India. Well, then I'm not well aware of the extent to which India is involved in the development of rail standards. Probably it is, but there's a need to bridge between rail standards and roads, and that is an area where there's more work to do. And finally, the 2 points which I want to really highlight is the importance of developing regulatory policy related with low carbon fuels, integrating electricity and hydrogen for the reason I mentioned earlier, since India has a high dependency right now on coal for electricity production, even though there is a very dynamic development of solar. And this is important to ensure that the technology transition to electric and hydrogen is environmentally sound. This is also important looking at hydrogen as something that can be produced from many different primary sources and really needs to be characterized with respect to well-to-tank emissions. And then another point, which is an area where I understand not much has been done so far, is the need to look at the life cycle approach when considering regulations that relate with batteries. And this is very important for heavy-duty vehicles, given the size of the batteries we're talking about. Voila, this is my last slide, apart from the thank you slide, which is next. And here you have my email in case of questions. This report is available on the ITF website. I would be happy to share if you drop me an email if you are more interested to understand more about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cazzola. It was very interesting to learn about the report. Specifically on the thermal propagation of the large-sized batteries. I mean, India is still, in some sort of nascent stage when it comes to, mainstreaming the electric vehicles in the urban transport, and freight transport is obviously the next destination. What was also interesting to learn is, the focus on developing charging standards for heavy vehicles for freight. And the fact that you highlight that the power sector as well as the automobile sector need to work together. But I would also like to, highlight that, the point where you mentioned about the hydrogen refueling, that it is possible for storage at 70 megapascal, and the requirement for, high flow nozzles in the freight trucks. But, before we get into all these things, what I also understand is, fuel cell technology is sort of yet to become mature in India, if I can say that. And there are some very high investments that are required for, hydrogen distribution infrastructure. And like you mentioned, just like electricity, hydrogen production will have to be derived from renewable sources. If I can talk from the GHG footprint point of view. With this, maybe I can hand it over to Ms. Ulka Kelkar to moderate the panel discussion and Q&A. She is Director of the Climate Program at WRI India. She's an economist with 2 decades of experience in climate change research, capacity building, and outreach. And she leads the WRI India's work on climate policy, which aims to support India's pathway to a climate resilient low-carbon economy through judicious national policies, carbon market mechanisms, and effective implementation in states and cities. Ms. Kelkar, you have the floor now. Thank you.
Thank you, Subrato. I'm just wondering if Ms. Chowdhury has 2 minutes. I know she has to leave soon, but I wonder if she has a couple of minutes to answer the question. Ma'am?
Yes, Ulka, I was just going to log out, so let me now restore the screen.
If we could just catch you for just a minute before you leave. First of all, thank you so much for going into so much detail, which you went into a lot of detail regarding warehousing, multimodal logistics, parks, and we of course know about Indian Railways' very ambitious target of net zero. Just wanted to ask you, if I could ask you for your wish list on access to finance, what would that be, and what would be the strategies that are needed to support that, just on finance? Thank you, ma'am.
I wish I could have another session where I could talk for half an hour on this, but okay, let me think. Okay, very quick. I think one of the issues that has been spoken about is that we need to have R&D, both indigenous, and we need to pick up on what's being done overseas. A lot of the risky technology that's being tested, it is governments that are best suited for investing in such things. So this is where I would like the government to partner with the private sector, whether overseas or in India, and start R&D where you could start testing this technology. I work in parallel with this entity where we are looking at financing initiatives, which are also coming from, donors, etc. But to get things to scale, we need a lot of R&D being done in-house, like in an organization like the Railways. Battery storage is something that we are looking at. Another thing that we need to look at is whenever a train runs, we are, in terms of a green, like carbon footprint, we are much better than other transport services. But even every time a train track has a wheel touching it, we are emitting certain pollutants. What is the technology for looking at that? These are some things that we should be doing. They're at a very nascent stage globally also, not just over here. 3, can we reach the stage where passenger traffic movement is rationalized to ensure that we become the bulk logistics providers, the backbone for logistics for freight, as it was at the time of independence? Everyone knows the reason why we lost the share. 4, could we reach a stage, and I am in the transport infrastructure side, and infrastructure finance is my passion, but I'm also a closet green. So when I hear that in Kerala you're going to have 2 lines and 3 lines, you sometimes worry about the forests that have to be cut down. Is there some kind of a balance we can strike between these 2 things? Eventually, I think we'll find a way to do this. I know the tussle is always between development and the cost of development and the cost that we are taxing the globe with. This is something that we need to see. A lot of research, Ulka. The financing that we are doing, the kind of PPP structures that we are looking at, including and this is not in manufacture. Manufacture is just joint ventures that we are, manufacturing centers that we are setting up are joint ventures. But the PPP structures that we could think of, which will work if we have an independent tariff regulator. Body that can actually scientifically set up some kind of a tariff regulation system. And I think in India, and all of us who are in government face this, we have very good laws. I think enforcement of laws becomes very, very important, because that also sends out a signal that we will not brook any breaching of legal norms. This includes in contracts and in transport. That's about it. I'll have to rush now, like I said. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We are very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
So with that, let me just say that, this has been a fascinating session. Number of challenges now have been identified by the speaker. Number of excellent ideas have been put forward by the speakers. And to me, I always feel that this sector has such a transformational impact and a direct people's impact, because we know that in India particularly, there is a direct implication for inflation for prices of basic goods and services. So although it seems like a very hardcore technical kind of sector, there is a very human face to the kinds of challenges and strategies that we've been talking about. So with that, let me just ask a couple of questions to the panelists, Mr. Jyotilal and Mr. Gajjar. Mr. Jyotilal, let me just turn to you first. And I really admired the way you identified the issues of aggregation and the need for integration. You spoke about safety issues as well, and the need for technology that is suitable for Indian conditions, and giving the example of how Kochi is playing this pioneering kind of leadership role of using green hydrogen for mobility. So thank you so much for the details in your presentation. I wanted to ask you a little bit about one thing that Mr. Gajjar touched on, which is the potential for environmental regulations of a fuel use mandates. Do you see a role for this in the Indian freight sector for fuel use mandates, particularly in the private sector? And the second question relates to things that you spoke about, Ms. Chavli also spoke about, like these multimodal logistics parks. Do you think cities can do some kind of integrated land use planning in order to address the kinds of issues of freight that you've spoken about? So these 2 issues, environmental kind of mandates, fuel use mandates, and integrated land use planning, or any other aspect of integration that you might like to highlight. So, thank you very much. So I think you're on mute. You'll have to unmute yourself. So if you click on that orange arrow, it will show you the control panel. Shubroto, can you help Mr. Jyotilal?
Right. So on your right, you can see one small panel, small square box, rectangular box, in fact. If you can,
Yeah,
yeah. Okay, great. Thanks.
Yes.
yeah.
Thank you.
No, sorry. In fact, one is environmental. I think the polluter has to pay. That's a principle which has been accepted globally. I think it is time that we bring in some legislation so that there is a. We had brought something called green cess. Any vehicle which is using diesel or petrol, we used to put on green cess. When you sell the petrol or diesel, we used to charge 1 rupee or so. So that is one way of doing. Now polluter has to pay means now you invest in a clean energy. Naturally, the amount of carbon you reduce. For example, let's see, high speed. We are putting semi-high speed. We said 275 lakh carbon dioxide reduction will be there. Why not do the trading so that some industry anyway there will be there which will be polluting. So you will have to buy the carbon credit from them. So that is another way of financing. In fact, last time you were asking how do you find source of financing. That is one way. I think that. Second is what is it? Apart from the taxation is one way, but I think taxation generally no government would like to tax the public, that much. So this is one way of carbon credit, and then bringing in legislations so that every sector follows that. No government wants, and everyone wants to be the cheapest. The cost of transportation should be lowest. That's why one of the reasons why diesel is cheaper compared to petrol. What is it? The country petrol should have been the other way, cheaper than the diesel. But that I think that that's a way I think we should look at it. But both the carbon credit and maybe funding and carbon trading also we should be allowed. I think there's no exchange for that. So I think that is one suggestion. Coming to the city planning, actually, the transport planning and city planning should go hand in hand. What has happened in most of the cities, if we say there are no, maybe city planning goes its own way. The comprehensive CMP, which each city is supposed to make, that goes in another way. There is no integration. So instead of a coordination, what we are trying to bring through the mechanism of MTA is nothing but integration of various, both the planning, urban planning and transport planning. Third one is like, for example, Cochin, what we are planning is the Kalamassery, which is the railhead. They are adjoining the railhead itself. We are planning the logistics park so that the truck movement can be integrated with the rail movement. So similarly with the air, the port, truck, as well as the rail, all modes of and water transport. In fact, Vaitila in Cochin, we are making one center where everything is integrated. If you say okay, metro is there, then the train is there, the bus is there, then the water transport, water metro is there. So all getting integrated. So similar thing we need to do for the logistics so that the cost of logistics will come down. We are in fact one more suggestion which I was just telling PPP. Bus logistics port is one area where it can be PPP can work. Government will be the promoter. Maybe we will take up some equity of 26% so that we become a facilitator. Logistics port private limited is one concept. Bus port private limited and logistics port where we will put some money. There are funds. If we give 6% dollar return, we have got an asset management company. Probably after Tamil Nadu, Kerala is next state to have its own asset management company, which will we take funds from where we keep around 49% and 51% is by banks and other funding agencies, green growth equity funds, etc. We can channelize the funds. Funds is the last thing. I think that is not the main issue. We should have a structure and we should have a system in place to channelize the funds. If we are able to give maybe 6% dollar return, I'm sure that even Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, all of them will be interested. All the sovereign wealth funds are looking for investment in India. I think this is one area where we should tap it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Let me now turn to Mr. Kazola. So you spoke very nicely about a lot of the technical innovations and in terms of where India is and can learn from developments that are happening around the world. You also spoke about safety, which Mr. Jyotilal also spoke about, and how technologies need to be suited to the local conditions. I was very curious about the point that you raised just in passing about how the hydrogen that is used has to be very pure and that there are specific policies that are needed for that. So I wanted to ask you, what are the sort of things that India can keep in mind right from the outset in terms of this purity of hydrogen? And secondly, what do you think of issues like battery swapping for trucks that is being talked about in Indian conditions? I have more questions as well, but let's start with these two.
Yep, thank you for the questions. Okay, what I can say on hydrogen purity is fuel cells to operate require very clean hydrogen. And ensuring that hydrogen is very clean once you have a rather complex supply chain that requires first to produce hydrogen very clean, then to store it and distribute it and refuel at the stations. It's something that in a discussion we had about this very topic emerged as something that may be challenging. There are concerns in the auto industry, so in the manufacturers, that if the fuel is not clean enough, the durability of the fuel cell will be compromised, and that's obviously an issue. And there are challenges in ensuring that you can test the purity of the fuel when you actually refuel rather than when you produce it. So the issue is you may make it very clean at the beginning, but then you have different steps before it gets to the vehicle. And so there is a need to ensure that the purity of the hydrogen can be tested at a later stage in the supply chain. And so there is a need to develop instruments allowing that, essentially. These do not exist right now. So there's a need to cooperation between governments and fuel industry and vehicle industry to ensure that that's going to be the case. So this is in particular what I was referring to. When it comes to battery swapping, history shows that battery swapping has been working for very light vehicles. There is a case of Gogoro in Taiwan. You may know about it. It's basically an electric scooter that has swappable batteries, and has been. And I understand there's also interest in India about this concept. But the scooter battery is a light battery. It's like it's 2 kWh. It's a small thing. You pull it up, you can take it and just easily plug it to a conventional plug, and that's it. When it comes to a heavy-duty vehicle battery, we're talking about very large batteries, very heavy batteries, difficult to move in a way. So you need a strong, you need a big infrastructure to enable something like that. So I am personally not convinced that I haven't heard anybody, let's say, so far talking about battery swapping for trucks, presumably because of the barriers that exist in terms of just weight and complexity to actually and ensure that can happen in practice. So that's the best feedback I can give you on that one.
Thank you. Thanks. I'll come back to you with another question, but let me just turn back to Mr. Jyotilal for a minute. Sir, what are your thoughts about the Integrated National Logistics Action Plan and the need for states to align their development plans with this national plan? Do you foresee any challenges, or what has been your thinking in Kerala in particular? So you need to unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, sorry, I think it. Yeah, in fact, the industrial, what to say, they were talking about the 7 corridors which the government of India is making. That's a good project, but I think real challenge might be where land acquisition, and especially in Kerala, where we used to say that we couldn't give even the God 3 feet of land. That's why we are celebrating Onam. So land acquisition is one area where I think states will have to work with the central government and make sure that it is done in time. Generally, it takes roughly, I think, say 600 days for acquiring land as per the new act, LARA Act. It can be, maybe I was just seeing, going through the Ethikani, this thing for the national highway, what they developed, something around 150 days, they could reduce it from 600 to 150 days. I think that is a critical challenge as far as the freight corridors are concerned. But that's a great step. And in fact, you're working from Kochi to Mumbai, to Kandla, the 7th corridor, which is proposed. So, but apart from that, the states is where the implementation, most of the legislations are the state legislations, so that means the states will have to work in tandem with the government of India. At least there's a logistic, there's a separate ministry. I am sure they will be able to coordinate. But I think 2-3 other points which Madam Chowli also, she was also mentioning that you need to have a regulator in place so that even tariff fixation. So you should have one body, just like electricity regulator is there. So that wherever PPP, private player is also there, I think it is better to have a regulator so that the cost or the fares are fixed according to the actual cost, and there is somebody to oversee that. So then I think I was mentioning about one more point, Multimodal Transport of Goods Act 1993. That's applicable not for domestic freight. I think we have to bring in so that there is a standards, there is a mechanism, there is a procedural simplification or unification which happens across the board. So you have to look like a citizen-centric approach for the passenger movement. The goods also is like that, instead of replacing the person. So it's a goods-centric approach is what is required as far as the probably freight movement is concerned. So you look at that good so that it is safe, it reaches with the minimum disturbance, safety of the goods, as well as what is how you manage it. So I think then maybe a regulatory mechanism, as I said, and maybe you use the IT so that nowadays you can track everything. Even like parcel service, they give you this thing, you can track where the parcel has reached. So similarly, goods movement also similar thing has to be done. I think all these things, I think you need a state and center has to work together to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll ask one last question to Mr. Gajjar, and then I will turn to both of you and ask the same question, which is about the opportunities for including freight in India's NDCs. But let me turn to Mr. Gajjar first. And the question that I have is really, if you could, based on the experience of other countries, all the sort of assessments that you've been doing, if you could identify a few incentives that India could use for electrifying freight, what are the 2 or 3 kind of good examples or policies with good potential that you would recommend to India in terms of incentivizing the electrification of freight?
Okay, I'll focus on roads, if that's okay for you.
Of course.
So I think electrifying road freight, like in general, electrifying vehicles in India, it's something that would probably need to start from light vehicles. And that is true for passengers and also for freight. And so I see the greatest interest, for example, in the case of passengers, in the 2- and 3-wheelers space. For different reasons, for the size of the batteries and for the usage profile. 3-wheelers are especially interesting because they are heavily used and they require small batteries at the same time. And 3-wheelers are also used for freight deliveries, as far as I understand, in India. And they could be the place to get it started when it comes to freight. And not just for passenger, especially for urban deliveries. The second area where I understand that there's a greater potential due to structural reasons, so the fact that batteries can be right-sized and therefore can cost less, and you still have high usage rates, but you don't require fast charging, are in general urban deliveries for light commercial vehicles or small trucks. So those are cases where you don't need massive grid investments to enable something like that to happen, and you can basically start small. So that is like the market segment where I would get things started, and I think switching towards electrification for heavier trucks and longer distances is going to be a much bigger challenge and probably will require some time. It's not also already developed in other parts of the world. So the policies that you can use for that, there are a combination of different policies. You can regulate. You can regulate for fuel economy, for example, or for greenhouse gas emissions per kilometer on a tailpipe basis. I think it's important to also regulate on the carbon content of the electricity. So ensure that if you transition the vehicles, then you're also buying green electricity, solar, ideally. You can regulate. So you will need time if you want to piggyback on regulation developed internationally, but and probably this is not as important if you are talking about highly utilized vehicles, but there is also scope for regulating on the carbon content of the batteries. You can use economic incentives. Economic incentives like fee-based, so basically differentiated taxation for different vehicles according to their environmental performance. There are pros and cons with that. If a vehicle has a business case on its own because it's heavily utilized and doesn't need big batteries, using a fee-based is a bit of a waste of public money because normally you already have a case that should happen by itself. So in that case, I think a regulatory approach is better than an economic approach. There's better ways to spend public money. And so maybe pushing for like in specific segments, regulating could be better as far as I see. There is a role for public procurement. For example, postal vehicles fit very well the profile of urban deliveries, and they are the same as those used in freight deliveries, where they are often purchased in bulk by governments. So those could be interesting cases to use procurement plans to try to transition or bring interest in offering vehicles that are then also used for freight deliveries. Well, I'll stop it here. I can go on for long if you want on this.
Well, thank you so much. And so a lot of food for thought there. So I think just to wrap up, I'll pose the same question to both you and Mr. Jyotilal, and I'll continue with you, Mr. Gajjar, before letting Mr. Jyotilal have the last word. But the question is really something that that was there in the background note, in the background document that was shared, and it sort of captures all of the discussions that we've been having, all the different elements of finance, technology, policy, coordination challenges, all of that. What we have done in this webinar is really to go into the details of what prevents us from achieving the potential that exists. And the ultimate goal is that really in India, for example, we have our NDC, our nationally determined contribution, our Paris Agreement target, as it's said in climate circles, where we have a nationwide target. We don't specify sectoral details. We have not broken it up into what should transport do, what should freight do. So if we were to do that, if we were to identify opportunities in the freight sector for India to specify or to take on in its Paris Agreement or NDC targets for the future, what would those 1 or 2 or 3 top ideas be according to you? Something that is achievable, something that is in line with our development priorities, what we want to do anyway, and something which has really kind of, it gives a long-term signal to this sector of the direction in which we want to go, in which the country wants to go. So, Mr. Gajjar, may I request you to start and give your sort of final summation of the top 2 or 3 ideas for India to include in its NDC in the future, potentially from freight. And then I'll request Mr. Jyotilal to do the same as well. Yeah, please.
Okay, so this is specific to freight.
But if it combines with other things, please feel free to do so.
It's okay. But first of all, I have to say, I think it's important to acquire a capacity to go deeper into the definition of the NDC strategy. I think this is going to be extremely important, not only for meeting climate goals, but also for steering industrial development. I have the impression that we're moving into a phase globally which is going to be heavily affected by is going to be heavily influenced by choices made by different governments in the space of climate policy, to the extent to which they will also be bear implications for jobs and for economic development. So I think it's important to ensure that there is capacity in India to understand this and take action, and that means more granularity in the NDC is a kind of is like a starting point for getting there. So that means equipping different government levels with modeling tool with capacity to do quantitative analysis. Then beyond that, I think some of the parts that so you mentioned the fact that currently everything is bundled under a single umbrella. Well, I think going then deeper and passenger freight, and when you go to freight, then having an understanding of what should happen on the vehicle side and what should happen on the energy carrier side, so on the fuel side, will be important. For that, I think there's a need for like to take clean, proper decision. There's a need to look at the transport sector from a life cycle perspective, freight transport from a life cycle perspective, trying to bring in the different components, helping out to understand what are the key priorities, what could be the key solutions that deliver across the board, and then thinking about what kind of instruments could help achieving those. I think there's scope for economic and regulatory instruments at the same time. It depends really on the application. I understand the point that was raised before, for example, by the fact that it's more difficult to tax than to regulate. So maybe depending on the political opportunity, there may be a choice that goes more in one direction rather than the other, but that's the kind of space where we're talking about. I don't think any of these, anything that relates with trying to reduce emissions in freight transport goes against the current interest of India, which is basically relating with access, economic development. So these can all be conceived in a way which is compatible with those priorities, and can also conjugate the climate mitigation as part of that. And I think this is also something that will increase resilience, because I don't think the pressure in taking action on climate goals will go away soon. I think that's there to stay and maybe even grow over time, and so that will also help India ensure that its own key asset remain resilient over time.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. And Mr. Jyotilal, if we could give you the last word on one or two top actions that you think India could potentially in the future, the opportunities for India to include in its future NDCs.
Yeah. In fact, see, our target is minimum 33 to 35% reductions compared to 2005 level. In fact, the goods movement, or the logistics part has got a big role to play. So I think there is a need. We talk about air quality. Why not we put air quality index as one of the parameters for between all the cities? Basically, most of the cities only create the pollution. We can have air quality index for for financing. For example, you have got maybe now your borrowing limits have been increased from 3.5 to 5%. We can put one criteria for your performance in improving the air quality as one of the parameters, so that apart from other reforms, so whoever performs, you will be rewarded. So the reforms can be found based on a performance. So I think that is one idea which I am having. Then the carbon to hydrogen transformation. Now the entire world economy is based on a carbon economy. I think the problems of the world are also due to carbon economy. So whether it is war, or you say pollution, or cancer, or any health issues, or even corona might be partly related to that. Wherever there is polluted, or people are living very closely, or the carbon or the air quality is one of the worst, I think the virulence of the virus is also very high. So I think there is a shift from the world is going to shift from carbon to hydrogen, and that will make the world a better place to live. So I think that transition, though it may take 10 years or 15 years, but we need to start it now. So it takes minimum, what do you say, it takes some time for the people to switch over. Only thing COVID has made, what should have happened in 2030, now I think it is happening in 2020. I think so. In that way, it's a great opportunity. Now, I have got 2-3 more suggestions. One is, for example, now it's a time for, you need to, the real challenge is how to make it viable for people to switch over to the cleaner fuels. Apart from the other taxation measures, see, you need to make the cost at par with or somewhere near the diesel. So this is a time of digital manufacture. Actually, 3 M's are merging: manufacturing, medicine, and media. Digital manufacturing. So the one of the 3, why all companies have gone to China, because the cheapest labor is available, or you have got the ecosystem for the manufacturing at the lowest cost. Now no more it's required, because I think with the digital manufacturing we should be able to, in fact there are companies which come by second generation electric vehicles which they can produce at the same cost as that of a diesel vehicle. So I think digital manufacturing is one which we need to, with the robotics, artificial intelligence, it should be possible. That is second, so that second generation electric vehicles or fuel cell vehicle at the same cost as that of what is diesel or petrol. Second, how to make this as an income for the people so that adoption will be much faster. I can tell you that 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers adoption is fast. We don't even give subsidy. People buy it because it's much cheaper compared to the diesel. So others, vehicle to grid is one concept. You need to have smart grid so that vehicle to grid can be done. I was told that Nissan CEO was mentioning that he can power a house for 5 days or 7 days without electricity. You buy one car, Nissan car, Nissan Leaf will power your house for next 5 days. So I think vehicle to grid and giving back to the grid balancing. So there is a need for integration between power OEMs and OMCs, oil marketing companies, equipment manufacturers, as well as the power. I think that is, and the power companies have to become, or even OMCs, oil marketing companies should transform themselves into total energy companies. And last but not the least is actually battery and electric or hydrogen integrated. I was told about one company called Tesla, which in Netherlands, which will do, see, the range extension use the fuel cell, but basic thing is the battery. So battery and this goes hand in hand. So I think that we need to look for the ideal mix so that the range anxiety, the charging anxiety, all these things can be solved. And we need to look for disruption in the sector so that it is at par with the diesel. I think then the transformation from hydrogen or to carbon economic to hydrogen will happen, hydrogen electric will happen. Then last point is the bonds. You are talking about, we need the bond market. You need investment. This is a huge investment required in the infrastructure or storage side. So you need to have financing which is available on a long term at a lower rate. Probably banks and NBFCs may not be able to fund it. So you need to create either funds or the bond market so that the incentives for investment in these sectors will be supported by the government of India. So these are some of my suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks to both of you for sharing so generously your time and going into the details of this sector. We really are very grateful to have you with us today. Before I hand over back to Subroto, I just wanted to let you know that this webinar will be available online as well, and we hope that it will reach a much wider audience. Thank you very much once again. Subroto, over to you, please.
Thank you, Ms. Kelkar. May I now take the opportunity, since we just have 1 minute left, to thank all the distinguished speakers and panelists on behalf of WRI India. A big thank you to all the attendees. We hope that you have enjoyed the discussion as much as we did. On that note, I would like to close the webinar. Most important, stay safe, stay healthy, and take care. Thank you so much.